Hello again, Steve here with a little bit of a conversation about censorship on the internet. Now, this is not a surprise to me that censorship would be going on. There are, of course, those who are promoted on the internet and those who are driven down. But this isn't a new thing. This has always been going on. I'm reading a book, quite an old book right now about different forms of family planning that took place way back in the day. And some of this stuff was written based like the early 1900s, and how a lot of the information about contraceptions and so on were just driven underground, and there'd be a whole gang up from the whole society, right from the judiciary all the way down, to stifle this sort of stuff. So, and it's always been the case that some sort of expression of freedom has been outlawed by those who claim authority over others. So it's no surprise that when freedom would start to rear its ugly head again, and I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek because it's certainly an ugly head to those who are despotic enough to claim, to have the audacity that they would have the right to claim others. I'm talking about you, people like you, Angela Merkel, over in Germany, who want to put more and more and more net censorship in place. So much so that they are pressuring the mainstream social media platforms to begin to throttle back on what the gatekeepers of great morality in the world, so-called, claim is offensive. And of course they are at odds with America, certainly the European, that's the old world. They don't have as much of a concept of freedom of speech. It's a speech is in those places is more of a privilege than it is a right, and there's a difference there. And so people like Angela Merkel and the whole cascade of academia and media and priestly classes and so on that surround them, they really don't like America, and they don't have a hard-on of hatred for Donald Trump just because he's Donald Trump. Because back in the day, of course, Donald Trump was the darling in many ways of Western civilization. He was this social democrat, sort of a bit of a libertine in many ways, who was a bit of a media darling. They don't hate him because of that. They hate him because he is part of a freedom movement. I mean, I wouldn't call him. I still call him a better manager of socialism. Really, that's what he is. But nevertheless, those who they think he represents are a very, very, very dangerous ilk to them. And the reason is because parasites, I've used this in some of my books that I've written, parasites rely on a host, and a host has to be a producer. So the producer doesn't really need the parasite needs the producer. And people in these power structures who don't produce anything, they just feed off of the working stiffs down at the bottom. They don't like it when there's more freedoms given to the working stiffs, because all of a sudden the working stiffs might start thinking, we don't really need those people in their ivory towers. How about we go push over their ivory towers and see if they like it? So they really, because what happens when there is a breakdown and a real sea change is very often historically is that these leaders lost their heads and they went to guillotines and they went to gallows and whatnot. I'm not saying that would happen now, but certainly, there's still that psyche within a psychopath's or a control freak's mentality, probably, that hanging on to power is akin to hanging on to life. And so what do I think of this internet censorship? Well, first of all, it's inevitable, because anytime that there's a control network, they want to keep that control network. If there's fragments of the controlled populace that starts to break out and create their own narratives, those have to be put down by the control freaks. At the same time, when enough rise up, then it gets out of control. So they don't want those. So that there is internet censorship is a natural outcropping of freedom. Anytime there's freedom, there will be curtailments of that freedom, guaranteed. On the other hand, though, there has always been in the history of man the progression towards greater levels of freedom. Sure, there's ups and downs. There are downs, but then the next up is higher than the last up. Written about this in a couple of my books. I call it the continuum of advancement, which is that the nature within each and every one of us is this continuum, is this desire, this ever-present desire, so long as we're alive, to increase our quality of life in the moment. Aggregated over time, it means an increase in quality of life over time. Now, this then means if we're able to somehow organize our lives well enough, we can accumulate all of those moments into movements of greater quality of life. Increases in wealth, more knowledge, increases of understanding, better forms of empathy, and so on. And at the end of the day, greater methods of production. Now, there are two different ways of production that have taken place in the world. There's the push and there's the pull. The push is central control, which is top down. We know better. I, Angela Merkel, know what's best for the eyes and ears of the people of Germany. And therefore, I'm going to pressure these organizations to cut out certain people who I deem as offensive to my people, who might actually teach them some truth, or that might actually teach them some things about World War II or something like that, which is, I'm going to say is offensive. But what I really mean is, I don't want them to know that, because I got my own propaganda program running, and I don't want a counter narrative to that. But at the same time, that of course is going to go on, but over time with these two systems, so that's the top-down pushing. The other one is the free market. The free market, business people, a free market is, I'm going to give you a reason to look at me. I'm going to create a good headline. I'm going to create an offer. I'm going to create a deal. I'm going to create something, and I'm going to present it in such a way that maybe you'll take the bait. And not take the bait that it's a fraud to you, but take the bait that it's beneficial to you. We're going to freely trade, right? Whereas in the push market, it's not about freely trade. It's either you move, or we shoot you, or we incarcerate you, or we fine you, or we do whatever. We're going to use coercion to make sure that this system operates. Whereas the other system is cooperation. And that's much more effective. You see, one of the reasons why slavery eventually had to go the way of the dodo is it's incredibly inefficient. If you have to put a lot of effort into somebody to push them around, then as soon as you're not pushing them around, they're not being very effective. Whereas if you incentivize somebody to be productive by allowing them to be part of the profit of that production, then you're no longer pushing them. You can continue to put out the incentives and guide those incentives and organize those incentive structures in such a way that you can build by leadership. Leadership is the opposite of coercion. Leadership is, you lead, you stand at the front of the pack. That's why it's called leadership. And you draw the system, right? Whereas coercion or slavery, you see the old pictures of the slave, you always had to have, point men pointing and pushing and threatening and beating and whatnot in order to entice compliance. So the reason that that internet censorship won't work in the long run is because it'll just be so overburdensome. And right now there's momentum to overcome that. You see, of course, the internet was probably created as to create a worldwide surveillance system, but it got away because it got into the hands of everybody. And it still is a worldwide surveillance system, sure, but in the meantime a lot of people have found out, and a lot of people have learned how to use torrents, and blockchain is coming along and so on. So there's a snowball effect, which is that yes, everything's being surveilled, but at the same time so much information is out there that the information about the skeptical mind has gone pretty much viral, that they don't believe these power structures anymore. And therefore, I think even though the workings are well underway to censor and shut down dissenting opinions on the internet, there are many people, including the what do they call it, the autistic army or whatever on places like 4chan and so on, who are able to figure these things out, and they're ahead of the curve because the intelligent people are the counter-narrative now, is the counterculture. The new counterculture is where the intelligence is. That's where reporting takes place. That's where ideas take place. That's where the meme warfare is taking place. That's where the blockchain is being invented and the torrents are being invented. And even in places like Germany, there's ways of getting around it, right? Germany can shut down things and they'll find it through another country or whatever. Like I was talking to a guy recently, young guy from China, and he was saying there's no YouTube in China. It's actually illegal to watch YouTube. But anybody who knows what they're doing can get YouTube because they come in through a torrent or whatever it is. I don't know how to do it, but they do it. So it's worldwide, and it's difficult to shut that down because things are being beamed off of, satellites all over the world. So how do you shut that off? You can't shut that off. And even I was talking to somebody not long ago about Cuba and how Cuba had basically shut the internet down. So what there were was local internet systems which were thumb drives, and people would smuggle these thumb drives in with massive amounts of information about whatever somebody is looking for, tourists and whatnot, and give it to somebody, and that would be just spread around the village like that, and it would be on everybody's computer who had a computer. No internet, but they're still getting videos and whatnot. They're getting that. So yeah, human beings are incredibly ingenious, and there's always been a predator and a parasite class within the human structure. And at the end of the day, the parasites rely on the producers. And the producers are always moving forward. And they are the driving force of evolution. They always have been. They always will be, I think. And there will continue to be this continuum of evolution, continuum of advancement, rather, because we, as human beings, in the moment, we want to have a greater quality of life. Aggregate that over time, we're going to continue to have a greater quality of life, unless, of course, we burn ourselves out. And then why does any of it matter? But I'm quite optimistic that things are going to be fine, and we're in for a great ride, a wild ride. We live in a wonderful time to see, basically good triumph over evil, as far as I can see it. And I think that good has always proven to triumph, and I believe it will again. Steve, you're getting great chatting. Talk again soon. Bye for now.